Morning to you from Jill and me. The time is now 8 o'clock. You're watching the BBC Breakfast News. The headlines this morning, Monday the 18th of February. Is Iraq ready to withdraw? This morning the Soviets are trying to find out. Iraq's foreign minister is meeting his Soviet counterpart in Moscow at the moment, but Tariq Aziz has said that Iraq has no new proposals. The Allied military commander, General Norman Schwarzkopf, has said that if the Iraqis do pull out in force, they will have safe passage home. There have been explosions at two London railway stations this morning, Paddington and Victoria. There are no casualties.
Also in Breakfast News this morning, the risks in reporting the war from Baghdad. The broadcasters respond to the criticism that they're instruments of Iraqi propaganda. And ready for the worst, the frontline hospitals prepare for the land battle.
We'll bring you more on those explosions in a few moments. But in Moscow this morning, the Soviet Union is testing whether Iraq might be prepared to withdraw from Kuwait without a land battle. But in the Gulf, the Allies have little hope of a diplomatic breakthrough, and they are ready to launch the ground offensive. Good morning to you from Laurie and me. The time is 8 o'clock. This is the BBC Breakfast News. The headlines this morning, Wednesday the 20th of February. Iraq is expected to say today whether it's prepared to withdraw from Kuwait. Foreign Minister Aziz is due to return to Moscow with the Iraqi response. The Soviets say they are hoping for a positive news. President Bush is suspicious, but Washington says the Soviet peace plan hasn't been totally rejected. At the Pentagon, military chiefs say the Allied forces are ready now for the ground war.
Also in Breakfast News this morning, the troops who'll be first into a land battle. America's 82nd Airborne, the parachute soldiers who'll be dropped far behind Iraqi lines. And here, with official figures likely to confirm Britain is in recession, how one firm is fighting for survival for the second time in 10 years.
We should know today whether or not Iraq is prepared to withdraw its forces from Kuwait. But what isn't clear is whether a verbal agreement from Baghdad will be sufficient to satisfy the Allies and call off the land offensive. Good morning to you from Laurie and me. The time is 8 o'clock. You're watching the BBC Breakfast News. The headlines this morning, Thursday the 21st of February. Iraq's leaders have been discussing their response to the Soviet peace plan. Saddam Hussein and the Revolutionary Command Council met last night. Foreign Minister Aziz will return to Moscow soon. Here, the Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd has said it's likely that the Iraqi occupation will have to be ended by military means. And after mass protests in Albania, President Ramiz Alia says anti-democratic forces are trying to destroy the country.
Also in Breakfast News this morning, the war of words on the front line, how America is enticing the Iraqi troops to desert, and the problems of keeping the troops supplied if a land war starts.
According to Baghdad Radio, Saddam Hussein and Iraq's Revolutionary Command Council met late last night to consider their response to the Soviet peace plan.
And Jill Dando for Breakfast News. It's 8 o'clock.
The liberation of Kuwait has now entered a final phase. I have complete confidence in the ability of the coalition forces swiftly and decisively to accomplish their mission.
Good morning to you. President Bush announcing that the land war to liberate Kuwait has begun. These are the headlines at 8 o'clock today, Sunday the 24th of February. A huge force of Allied soldiers and Marines is this morning attacking Iraqi positions inside occupied Kuwait. The ground offensive began 7 hours ago. Hundreds of thousands of American, British and other Allied troops are involved. In his statement from the White House, President Bush said Saddam Hussein had rejected a last chance to withdraw. A complete news blackout has been imposed on details of the operation, but it is said to be going well. Here, the Prime Minister has said that the thoughts and prayers of the nation are with our forces. We admire their courage, he said. Saddam Hussein's reaction to the Allied assault is being given in a broadcast which began within the past half hour on Baghdad radio.
In this special edition of Breakfast News, reports from our correspondents in Baghdad, on the front line, and from the United States. We'll have the Kuwaiti government's reaction. We'll assess the strength of the Iraqi armed forces inside Kuwait and ask what their tactics are likely to be. Plus, a profile of the man who must defeat them swiftly and decisively, General Norman Schwarzkopf.
A force of perhaps 250,000 Allied soldiers and Marines is this morning doing battle with Iraqi ground forces. The order to begin the Allied land offensive was given shortly before 4 o'clock local time this morning. Here in Britain, it was 1 o'clock. 8 hours had passed since the Allied deadline had expired. According to Allied commanders, there'd been no sign of an Iraqi withdrawal. Morning. Iraq says it's ready to withdraw from Kuwait. America and Britain say the war continues. These are the headlines at 7 a.m. today, Tuesday the 26th of February. Late last night, Baghdad radio announced that Iraqi troops had been ordered to leave Kuwait. No time was given for the withdrawal of Saddam Hussein's forces. Baghdad has said that the order complies with UN Resolution 660. The White House has rejected Baghdad's statement. It says Saddam Hussein must personally and publicly accept all Allied and UN terms. Until then, the campaign continues. British tanks have been in action for the first time. They're reported to have encountered an Iraqi mechanized brigade.
This morning's other Gulf War headlines. It's now known that that last night's Iraqi missile attack on Saudi Arabia killed 27 American servicemen. Almost 100 more were injured when the Scud landed on a reservists' barracks at Khobar City on the edge of Dhahran. And the land battle continues. Allied forces are deep inside Iraq, closing on Kuwait, and there are no signs of an Iraqi withdrawal.
Baghdad radio announced late last night that Iraqi forces have been told to withdraw from Kuwait. At the United Nations, the Iraqi ambassador has said that his country is prepared to pull out in accordance with the original UN Resolution 660. But the White House has said that this isn't enough. The war continues, it says, until Saddam Hussein himself is seen to tell his troops to lay down their weapons. This morning, the fighting appears to be continuing. British tanks from the 1st Armoured Division are reported to have been in action, though there are no details yet.
Good morning and welcome to BBC One, where it's now 6:30 and time for Breakfast News with Nicholas Witchell and Laurie Mayer.
pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.
Good morning to you. President George Bush announcing that the Gulf War is over. The fighting ended an hour and a half ago. These are the headlines at 6:30 today, Thursday, the 28th of February. 42 days after they went to war to free Kuwait, Allied forces have been told that their job is done. At 5 a.m. British time this morning, all coalition troops were ordered to hold their fire. There is silence on all fronts, say the Allies. Conditions for a permanent ceasefire have been sent to Baghdad. President Bush called it a victory for mankind and for what is right. He said soon the troops should be coming home. In Washington and on the front line, the cessation of military activity has been greeted with relief and celebration. Iraq's military machine has been destroyed. 40 of its 42 military divisions have been rendered ineffective, the Allies say. This war is now behind us, so said President George Bush early this morning, as he and the other Allied leaders gave the order to their troops to cease all offensive operations. Those orders took effect 90 minutes ago. After 100 hours, of ground fighting which continued last night as more Iraqi units were destroyed, the battlefields are now reported to be silent. The terms for a permanent ceasefire have been sent to Baghdad. The Allies are demanding the immediate release of all coalition prisoners of war and third country nationals and the return of the dead. The release of all Kuwaiti detainees. Details of the location of all land and sea mines. Compliance with all UN resolutions. Baghdad has this morning indicated agreement to this. Within 48 hours, Iraqi and Allied military commanders are to meet to agree details of a ceasefire. Mr. Bush warned that if Iraqi forces opened fire or launched missiles against any country, military operations will be resumed. In conclusion, Mr. Bush said that ahead lies the difficult task of securing a potentially historic peace. He said there would be no solely American answer. So far this morning there has been no response from Baghdad to the Allied conditions. Here the Prime Minister will make a statement to the House of Commons this afternoon. In both London and Washington there is already talk that it may be possible to bring some of the forces home within weeks. First to Washington and to President Bush's statement.